Hello, welcome to another episode of Learning Strategies. This is the live stream where we discuss all kinds of learning strategies with the world-renowned expert on learning strategies, Kate Benson. Kate Benson is the International Director for Education for the Society of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, also known as NLP. And let's get her in the stream. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Joost. How are you?
I'm doing a bit better than fine.
Good, good.
Good.
I'm just going to go and turn a light on because it's a bit dark on the screen and I've only just tested it. So give me 30 seconds.
Sure. I'll just remove you again, and then we are going to discuss the lighting issues. It's also important, the light. If you have questions, if you have any remarks, please feel free to comment. Please put your questions or your remarks in the chat. We are looking forward to see whatever you want to do. Let's see if... Hi, Ron. Good to see you. Hi, Christine. Also good to see you. So, welcome, everyone. Welcome, Kate. I'm not seeing any difference, but
no, it isn't any different, is it? But I have a bright light on. But
yes, but you look very healthy. Have you been in the sun?
Yes, I've been outside, and well, the 3 days of summer we've had so far. So yes, I'm always outside, Joost. You know this. But my happy place is my greenhouse. So
okay, well,
I'm out in the garden a lot. I have a lot of gardening to do.
All right, and I take it that you don't set goals for your gardening, but you do set a direction, because that's the topic for today's talk.
It is, yes, gardening metaphors today.
Yes, it's not a metaphor; it's actually real life.
It is real life, yes, but a metaphor in terms of goal setting.
Yes. Yeah. So the topic is goal setting, or what you prefer is to actually set the directions rather than goals. Can you explain the difference between a goal and direction?
Well, I wanted to, I'll just back up a bit further from that. I think you can set a goal, but the important thing is the direction, really, because you set a goal, you may never get to that goal, or you may get something in approximation to that goal, but it's the direction that counts. Right. So, and one of the reasons, because I'm thinking about things in education, one of the things that teachers complain to me quite a lot about is kids who now are aspirational without having to think about putting any effort in.
Okay.
So goals are often about what you want, but they don't build in the effort.
Right.
So, for example, and this isn't their fault, because you just look around on social media, and you have all these influencers who apparently just sort of wander around looking glamorous, and showing you their whatever the latest product that somebody's given them, to sort of promote and get paid ridiculous amounts of money for flouncing around the world, and so it's understandable that kids don't think they have to put any effort in. They don't see, of course, behind the scenes of these influencers who've set themselves the challenge, the target, the goal, the direction of becoming famous.
Right.
For not, so they're
by live streaming on Twitch.
It's not to be, it's famous, not for anything. I've never understood this, just wanting to be famous or wanting to be a celebrity. At one time, you were a celebrity because you did something useful. Einstein was a celebrity. The Beatles were celebrities. At least they could sing a few notes, and. Right. But now there's a whole celebrity thing that is just about, are you on the telly, or are you on Twitch? Are you on, social media?
We are on Twitch.
We are, yes. But I'm hoping that we're on Twitch being mildly famous for having done something useful. I mean, people might disagree with us, but, you and I, at least, we make the effort, Joost. We write books, we do courses, we have conversations, we use our brains. We put a bit of effort in. So really, I suppose the difference between a goal and direction is something to do with effort.
All right.
Activity, So, and a lot of these aspirational things. I mean, I remember when I was a girl. It's like you used to have, and it's been continued this idea that you can use an affirmation and get something. You know, the funny one that I remember from a girl was we used to go in, you know, every day in every way I get more and more beautiful. Well, you know, you don't unless you do something. If you have plastic surgery, maybe you do. If you work out, you do. If you have a healthy diet, you do. You might, you know, but you don't.
Plastic surgery only works if your beauty ideal is that of a lizard.
That's not very nice, is it?
Yeah, it's obvious that they have not yet worked out the kinks in plastic surgery. They're still in the experimentation phase. It's like let's wait a couple of decades to see if they actually come up with stuff that works.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, so the idea that you could just say that to yourself in the mirror and it will happen. Obviously, you know, there's a belief. Now that's about beliefs.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with believing in yourself and believing you can do things, but just believing that you're going to have it for no apparent reason is doesn't get you anywhere. So it's about movement, effort, drive in a direction. Now, you know, one of the ones that I use often, you hear kids saying, you know, that the example you've heard me use is, you know, where you say, what do you want? You know, what would you want out of life? What would you know, what's your ambition? And they say things like, I want to win X Factor.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's not necessarily just, you know, so good to sit back and wait to win at X Factor. Now, if you set a goal that's about, I want to be the best singer I can, and you know, and in order to, you know, be the best singer I can, so I've got the best chance of winning X Factor. That's a different sort of aspiration, goal, direction. And now you may never win at X Factor, but if you've done all the things, all the steps in the way that get you there, or will get you towards winning X Factor, you will have a good voice. You'll have used you'll have dedicated yourself to something. You'll have practiced something. You'll have developed a skill. You'll have met some interesting people. You'll have committed yourself to a routine of, you know, the what is it, 10% inspiration, 90% aspiration, or whatever that quote is about doing something. So at the end of the day, if you stand up on X Factor and you don't win, you've got resources that you've built for yourself. So that's why I think about direction rather than goals.
Yes, because the way I understood it is that goals are much more targeted and more specific, and direction is much more broader. And then it becomes much more easy to actually fail at achieving your goal. But once you set out into a certain direction, it's very hard to actually fail at going into the right direction.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, one of the reasons that I sort of picked that as a topic was that we're still under this you know, so we start with this aspiration thing, so we can sit there going like, if I dream and my dream, it'll happen, you know, that sort of like do nothing thing. And then we move to the other extreme, which is the SMART target. Right. So for anybody who hasn't come across SMART targets, it's the idea in business that you set a target that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. And it's also very boring.
I thought it was stupid, mediocre.
So that's what it actually, you know, and there's some things in there, but you know, you can. So the idea is that you've got to frame your goal in some way, your target in some way. I mean, then people changed it because basically SMART targets are rather dull. They changed it to smarter targets, so it's specific. Measurable, achievable, realistic, time framed, exciting and rewarding.
Right.
But just because you say it's exciting and rewarding doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be exciting and rewarding. So, so this sort of really, we wanted to look today at like the way NLP approaches goals and directions, as opposed to the traditional way of looking for smart or smarter targets, which are still used very much in education. And I'd like them to stop, really.
Yes. Okay. I thought education would be an area where smart targets would actually be quite applicable, because you have, I say, very well-defined norms that you need to achieve within a limited time frame.
Well, yeah, but they're often set. They are, but those aren't. You see, the idea of a smart target is it's set from inside, just like our well-formed outcomes are, primarily. Whereas most of the targets in education are set from outside.
Okay. Yes.
You've got to achieve five hires in this amount of time by the time you're 18, or 5 GCSEs or 11 GCSEs. They just increase the targets. You've got to pass these standard tests and that. They're all external references. So when we talk about some of the assumptions, presuppositions of NLP, where we say things like there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Well, in education, that's not true. You get a pass or a fail at this moment in time.
Yeah.
You cross the line or you don't cross the line. And
I think NLPers don't understand that sentence very well.
No.
There's lots of failure. I always like to annoy NLPers by saying, "Oh, yesterday I failed so hard at, I don't know, cooking a good meal," and they go, "Joost, there is no failure. There's only feedback." I said, "No. Yesterday I actually failed." And they just go, "What? You can't have failure. It has to be feedback." No, it's useful to take it as feedback, but you can also take it as failure.
Yeah. Well, the thing is whether actually that whole thing is about resilience. There's whether or not you learn from what's happened, whatever it is, whether it's successful or not, is whether or not you learn from it and move on. That's where the feedback bit comes in. So you go, even if it's to go like I often do, well, I'm never going to do that again.
Right.
That's useful feedback to myself to say, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, because we also know that people who have the mental issues are basically stuck in a feedback loop, and you have to set a counter to the feedback loops to prevent it from running on and on and on and on. And if you just go, okay, this is not failure, this is feedback. It just happens to be the thousandth time that I interpret it as feedback and not as failure, and well, maybe something goes wrong in your life.
So why do you say that's, sorry, this is divergent, because I'm always interested in what you have to say. Why do you say that's people with mental illness do that? Don't ordinary people get stuck in feedback loops as well?
Well, once you're stuck in a feedback loop, you're going to get into much problem. So the most obvious examples is actually people with mental issues, because they say, "Oh, I feel bad. Oh, I'm going to think about it. Oh, and I have negative inner self-talk. Oh, now I feel even worse. Now I'm going to talk more to myself about why I feel worse." So that's a loop, and that is basically they're trying their goal or the direction that they want to go is to feel good, and they fail over and over and over again in achieving that. So they get stuck. But it doesn't help if they are going to say, okay, but it's not failure, this fact that I'm depressed for 7 years. This is actually a feedback.
Yeah, it's better just to go like, let's put that one down and move on now. Try something different entirely. Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, so we have the affirmation thing, which we has failures, and then we has things that doesn't have enough elements in it. Then we have the smart targets, which almost have too many elements in it. It's too precise. Mm-hmm. So we've got those two extremes, aspiration and smart targets, and what we want is something in the middle that drives us in a direction towards an outcome or a goal. But that's one of the things is about not necessarily being that attached to that goal. If you're so attached to that goal that nothing else will work, then you miss lots of other opportunities. So going back to my kid who wants to win the X Factor, if they're completely attached to winning the X Factor, there might be a local competition down the road, and there happens to be some record producer who's popped in because his sister works there or something, right, and sees you. So you miss those, life chance opportunities. And so often, people who feel fortunate or lucky in life are those people who spot an opportunity or run with an opportunity, even when they're not quite sure where it's going to go. So there's another reason for having directions rather than goals. It's like that joke about God, isn't it? It's like the guy's on the island. He gets stranded on an island, and he goes, "It'll be all right because God will save me."
Yes.
And then a boat comes along and says, "Do you need help?" And he says, no, it's all right, God's going to save me. And then the helicopter comes along and, you know, he says, do you need help? No, God's going to save me. Eventually he dies and he gets to heaven and he said, why didn't you save me? He said, I sent a boat, I sent a helicopter.
Exactly, yes.
So it's about seeing the opportunities when they arise. And if I look at my life, and probably the same with you, Joost, you know, I feel very lucky and fortunate in the things that have happened to me. And when I unpack, you know, and I'm grateful for those things, but also I unpack them and I go, quite often I've just gone, well, why not? And something popped up, rather than going like, oh, there's a million reasons why I shouldn't, because this is my goal and I'm going in that direction. And I've gone, oh, okay, why not? Maybe there's something in this, you know, and NLP was like that. Well, why not? I thought, you know, there was this weird course came up and I thought, why not? Let's have a look at that, you know. So directions allow more possibilities and they allow more freedom of choice, if you like. But all the time you're moving, you know, and moving in the direction you want. And for me, you know, my direction was to be the best teacher that I could possibly be.
Right.
And so that allows me to sort of pull in lots of different things that might help me to be, you know, the best teacher I can possibly be.
Yeah. Well, I do feel grateful for what happened to me or how my life went up until 50. Then I had written my core books. All the core elements were ready. Well, not finalized, but at least it is out of my head into text. But I have the feeling that ever since I turned 50, that I'm heading into the wrong direction, namely my demise, my untimely death in 50 years, and the complete extermination of my subjective experience in this universe. So.
Well, I think you know, I'm very surprised. I didn't. When did you turn 50? Then is that this year?
No, last year. I'm not
very quiet.
Yeah, it was also smack in the middle of the Corona crisis.
Oh, well, that's why you haven't had a party, Joost. That's what you need, a party.
I never have parties.
You feel like that. You feel like that. I'm quite a number of years older than you in that, so I quite often feel that. And the other bit is I don't have quite the same energy. But again, you know, you move from, you know, maybe your direction changes. My direction changed. I've had a 5-year change of direction, really, when I haven't done as much in the NLP world as I did previously. But now that's, you know, that will change again. But I'm not going to go back to that place where I was 5 years before, because what I've got to offer is different now.
Right.
Some things that I have more of, like I think I've got more sort of general wisdom, but my, you know, in terms of, you know, I can't remember to quote this person and that question. Well, I can't decide whether I can't remember because my memory, I can't be bothered.
Right.
Because, you know, like at one time you justified your existence by quoting other people that, you know, you were right because they were right. Well, now I just think, well, you know, I've had about 60 years of experience, so take it as it is, you know. Right.
You also have to take into account what Nietzsche said. I will quote Nietzsche: if you quote others, it only shows the weakness of your own fault.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there was a lovely thing, Sheila Hancock. I don't know if you know Sheila Hancock in the Holland.
I don't think so.
She's 90 now, and she's nearly 90, and she's a very famous TV. She's made a very good living as a TV actress, and she was talking on the radio this morning, and she's always been quite left wing. Although she now says she's more, I think she's she has all that quite a lot of cynicism about the left, you know. But she's known as a lefty, and of course it's the Jubilee this week. We have a monarch who's been on the throne for 70 years, which is, you know, never going to happen again. You know, it's an astonishing thing. So, you know, even I'm not particularly patriotic, but I just, you know, there's a woman who's dedicated her life since she was 21 years old to, rightly or wrongly, you know, what she regards as the people of this country, and I think that's worth, you know, recognizing. So Sheila Hancock was saying, you know, that she's very fond of the Queen and she's very fond of royalty, and she likes the royal family. And somebody said to her, well, you know, how can you be a lefty and a royalist? And she just went, Well, because I am.
Right.
And she doesn't feel any longer that she has to justify her position. And I think that's one of the strengths of getting older. You no longer have to justify who you are like you had to. So I'm sure you'll get over your midlife crisis at some
The
point.
midlife crisis is around 35, according to Jung, who came up with the name.
Yeah, but I don't think that's true. I just think also the other thing I think of, and this applies definitely to women, but I suspect it applies to men. I think in the period from 46 to 56 is when you move completely into your power.
Okay.
My view is that 10 years is the, because you've as you said, you've written your seminal works, you've done your major works or whatever, you've still got the energy, you've still got the enthusiasm, and you have it all backed up behind you. After 56, the energy levels drop off a bit, so it's not quite it's not quite as easy.
Well, I have this theory that the phases in life follow the Fibonacci series. So that is 1,
you
2,
have a theory about that.
3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and then the midlife crisis at 34, and then the next one is 55. So that is right in the range that you said.
Yeah, yeah.
And
well,
then 89. The next phase will be 89. So you still look like 45. So you still have years to go.
Years to go. As long as the lighting's right. Anyway, we diverse.
We're going to the right direction.
We are going in the right direction. So I thought it would be quite interesting because there's quite a few people who haven't done much NLP who come on and watch these twitches. Is that what they call twitches?
No, they call it live stream.
Live streams, all right. Twitches. I know it's like twitches. Live stream. Watch these live streams, but they probably don't all watch them live. They watch them.
Yes, they watch them later.
Later live streaming or whatever it's called. So I have to keep up with the times here. So I thought it'd be quite interesting just to explain how NLP looks at goals and directions in a different way from the sort of the standard ones, which is what we would in NLP call well-formed outcomes, which is just the most horrific phrase you could imagine. Actually, it's the ugliest phrase I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So I use the term pure,
right,
because it's sort of pure and unadulterated, and it sort of says the same thing as, because we talk in NLP about something called the conditions of well-formedness, which again is probably the worst sentence that I can ever imagine. It almost makes me feel quite uncomfortable. So I use the term pure because it's easy to remember. It's a useful acronym, and it sort of describes what we're talking about. So I think I got a little slide we'll just pop it up and then we'll pop it down again, because we're just so people can see. There it is. There's the well-formed outcomes.
Yes. Well, you have to remember that a lot of the NLP that was developed in the early 70s was all based on the philosophy of language of the 50s and 60s. And they used all these well-formed outcome stuff, presuppositions, all those terms, normalizations, complex equivalences. It's all from the 50s and the 60s when they started doing this.
Well, of course it is, and it's useful if we can update it in a way that makes it, not that it's necessarily better, but that it's more understandable and more readily understable. You know,
makes it more pure.
Makes it more pure, yes, and you know, Richard's very clear on this, as are a lot of the great thinkers of our time. That, you know, that our job as teachers is to make what we've learned even simpler for our students to understand. And that's the job of a teacher. And a lot of trainers out there like to make it more complicated because it makes them look good.
Right.
Whereas the job of a teacher is to make it so simple or so easy to understand that the students go, well, that's not really that big deal, is it?
Yes.
So a teacher... Of
course, there is a difference between explaining it so that it can be easily understood and a simplification. So
yes,
you don't want to simplify stuff in the sense that you brush over crucial aspects of
I agree.
what we're talking about.
What's that quote, Yosh, you'll notice about you simplify it, but not, you know, not like you make it easy and simple, but not to the point where it becomes dumb. There's a brilliant quote? Is it Einstein?
I'm not familiar with it. I fear.
I can't remember. Anyway, somebody will remember. One of our listeners and viewers will probably remember which one it is. But it's where you reduce things to its most simple, but not beyond that.
Right. Yeah, well, that is what at least I don't know quote is associated with, but it's at least how I deal when a coachee or a trainee is unable to do something. Then you simplify it to a level that they are capable of doing it. But then, of course, once they achieved it, then you're going to build it up again to reach the original level that you wanted them to learn or to understand.
Yeah, and that's the concept in education of surface to deep learning. So if you make sure that the surface at which the student can access the learning is at an appropriately simple level, so they get it easily and quickly, and then you deepen the experience. So it's the same surface to be deep, but you're operating it in the reverse, so that rather than bringing out the deep experience, you're taking it down to a deep experience. So yes, and that's true. We're not talking about dumbing down.
Yeah. A design is perfect when there's nothing else to take out.
Yeah, that's a nice one, Jane. It's not the quote I was thinking of, but it's a really good quote. So I like that. Who said that?
Jane says it.
No. I think she's quoting somebody.
No, this is Jane.
It's a Jane quote. Well, we'll attribute it to Jane.
Jane is quoting herself.
Good. So yes, it's not about simplification. It's about dumbing down. It's about making it. I would prefer to use the word easy.
Mm-hmm.
Easy isn't necessarily simple. It just means understandable, explained well. So the easier something is understood, the better the job the teacher is doing in my view. Whether that teacher is, and we've said this every week, whether that teacher is a teacher in a school or a college, or a parent, a coach, an uncle, an aunt, somebody walking down the street talking to a kid, whatever, youth worker.
Anyone who wants to change the brain of another person.
Yeah, for the better.
Oh.
So, yeah, hopefully.
Most of the time.
Well, come on, Joost. Ecological checks, please.
Yes, definitely. That's exactly why I have a lot of issues with ecological checks. Is to say you have this bureaucrat, some civil servant who is bureaucratic, and he's actually making life difficult for lots of people in the community, where more people are worse off due to his bad acting. Then it's great that you can use actually brain change to let him feel that he's in the wrong, rather than punch him in the mouth.
Right. Yeah, well, we all need to see the error of our ways from time to time, and we can be good friends to people by pointing out the error of our ways from time to time.
Yes, people who won't listen have to feel. That's a Dutch saying.
Oh, is it? That's a good saying. I like that.
Yeah, but normally they mean that they're going to punch you in the mouth.
Oh, I see.
So it's more like a threat. So if you say, if you don't listen, I'm going to make you feel it.
Oh, I see.
So my idea is that you rather... Sorry?
I interpreted that as like, if you don't hear it like on a thinking level, then I'm going to make you feel bad about it. So that's
how I change it. So that's what I said. So that's what when I change it. So if you're not going to listen, I'm going to make you feel. But rather than give you a physical feeling of me punching you, I'm going to give you an emotional feeling of you feeling bad about the undesired behaviors that you just did.
Well, yeah, but that's not, that's okay from an NLP point of view, because that's you're making a judgment about a feeling, aren't we? We are making judgment about whether it's a good or bad feeling. Well, feeling bad or having a negative emotion, or one that's deemed to be negative, having a particular emotion can be a good thing, so it's that, I'm never going to do this again. Never again. This is never going to happen to me again. Or I've had enough of this. Or, I don't really care about that. So all of those things which we might label as negative feelings or bad feelings are actually quite useful to us.
Yes, but that's even within the...
They often drive change. For me, I still, and I'm quite aware of this, I quite often drive change in myself through negative feelings.
Right.
So if I find myself doing something over and over and over again, or I'm doing too
But that
much,
will improve your life over time.
Something that's taking me away from my goals or my directions, or it doesn't feel good for me to do, then at some point I'll start to feel bad, going, you know, I'm doing this. I'm getting up in the morning. I don't want to be doing this anymore.
Right.
And for me, that's a driver to go like, okay, well, it's time to stop. It's time to stop with this and fill it with something else, or find an alternative, or find a different way of doing that's easier or less tedious or whatever.
But that's for the improvement of your life. But I am talking about degrading the quality of the life of the bureaucrat in order to improve the lives of everyone else living in the community.
I don't dispute your right to do that, Joost. I would dispute whether or not that falls within the presuppositions of NLP.
Oh, I'm sure it falls within the presuppositions of NLP. I'm quite sure that many people overlook this small fact.
Okay, I'll be corrected by you, as always.
Where does it say that you can't do it?
I'm not arguing with you about it. It's not something that I'm particularly got on my game plan for this hour, however. So I'm going to pull it back to looking at pure outcomes.
Yes, but we see ecological coming up, so I'm sure.
Yes, I know. So it's probably you're going to swing it round again. But you've made your point beautifully, of course.
Thank you.
So when we're looking at sort of directions, or you know, what we want to do is to have somebody, have the person or yourself. You know, I put this as if we're thinking for ourselves, but it could well be to helping somebody else. That very, very simply, we need to state those things in the positives, so that if I've made myself feeling bad, like for example, as you know, I live in this vast place, and I don't really get enough help keeping it clean and tidy. Right. So I've been doing way too much sort of boring housework things. And so yesterday I did way too much. And I thought, I'm just fed up of doing this. I just don't want to do this anymore. Well, that's all stated in negative. It doesn't actually tell me which way I want to go, how I'm going to drive the direction better. Right. So I have to stop at that point and say, well, okay, what do you want instead? Rather than, you know, all the things I don't want. What do I want instead? Well, I want to be able to get up in the morning and not have to worry about whether the kitchen floor's cleaned or not. So how do I go about that? Well, I need to pay somebody else to do it for me. Right. And so I've started to move in that direction of looking for what else would get me the time and, you know, the space to do the things that I really want to do.
Right.
So it needs to be stated in positive. So it is, what do you want rather than what you don't want?
Yes.
The other reason for that, which we've said already on one of these talks, I think, is that the brain doesn't operationalize a negative. It doesn't it understands what a negative is, but it can't do it. Right. So, you know, don't talk about the war. It's like immediately.
Don't mention the war.
Don't mention the war. You know, immediately people go, what? Oh, which war? You know, now it's which war, you know. I've got a friend who's living next door. She's got some Ukrainians staying with her, some Ukrainian refugees, because we've got a policy in that we're not letting that many in the UK. You know, we're becoming like America. We don't let anybody in anymore since post-Brexit. Right. So make it very, very difficult.
Brexit. That's the direction Brexit wanted to go to.
Yeah, unfortunately, 49% of people didn't. So we've got this ridiculous system, but she has actually managed to connect up with a couple of Ukrainian refugees who are staying at her house, and she lives next to some Russians. So they spend the whole time with the sort of don't mention the war, don't mention who's staying sort of scenario going on. So
now I have a Russian lady in my current classes, so I also
you also go, don't mention the war.
Exactly, yeah.
So in the state of for the sake of peace and harmony, So the brain can't do it. It immediately negates the negative, if you like. It doesn't hear the negative, doesn't want to do it. So the brain hears the direction without the no or not in it. So it goes that way. So it's very unhelpful to state things to yourself or to other people in negatives. And some people just operate like that all the time. And, you know, there seems to be something they do. So people will say, you know, do you want to do such a thing? And one of the standard answers, especially in England, is, well, I've no problem with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, you've no problem with it, but does it mean that you want to do it? Or, you know, there's no propulsion in it.
I have nothing against it.
Yeah, I have nothing against it, but there's nothing that goes out. Yeah, there's no propulsion that pushes you towards something. So when we state something in positive, it builds a certain amount of propulsion into it. And it needs to be under our control. And we go back to the X Factor one. You know, winning the X Factor isn't under your control. It's under the control of the 4 judges and the audience.
Right.
But being the best you can be, being the best singer, being the best prepared in your act when you actually walk onto that stage gives you the best possible chance of influencing positively the 4 judges and the audience in your favor. Yeah. So you can only set those things which are under your control. And that's a particular issue with young people now. They just don't seem to think that it needs to be under their control, or the fact that they want it is something that you, as the other humans around them, should automatically give them because they're on the planet.
Yes.
So, you know, this is a particularly...
But I have a question about under your control. There's another one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
Can I have other people under my control?
Don't know, can you, Jos?
Yes, for instance, if I start a factory and I have factory workers and I have a well-formed outcome, in a sense, I want my factory to produce, I don't know, 100,000 automobiles a year.
Right.
That's not literally under my control in the sense that I can build those 100,000, but I can hire people to do the work for me. Is that still a well-formed outcome?
Yes, of course it is, because it's under your control to hire those people. It's under your control, providing you have enough money you generate enough money to pay those people.
Yes.
You know, it's under your control whether you exploit those people to the point that you really upset them and they walk off the job, or reward them well enough so that they work even harder and make even more of your cars, widgets,
yes.
or whatever it is. So yes, they are not under your control, but you have influence. Your behaviors can influence other people's abilities to do things, or to support your goal, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have any problems with that. You know, if I walk into a classroom, I can't control the people in my classroom, but I certainly influence them in a myriad of ways.
Right.
And every human, you know, we cannot not communicate. So we're always communicating, and that communication is a form of influence, and is influence. And so and which direction we influence them in is our choice.
Yes. So under control should be really interpreted rather broadly.
Yes, it's if you can't, and it's to do with frame, isn't it? So you know, if I say that I'm going to, you know, there's I want 100 people to come, and I want 100 people to make this for me. That's sort of not under your control, because there's 100 people who have to do something that you haven't got control over. But if you say, I'm going to find 100 people and pay them well enough that they will, you know, that hopefully there will be enough of them that will want to make those for me, that is under your control. So it's not the action necessarily, it's the way you frame it for yourself that makes it under your control or not.
So if I can bribe the jury of the X Factor, then winning the X Factor is still
that's right. You can say, okay, I've got, you know, I've got, you know, Mummy and Daddy have left me, you know, £70 million, and I'm going to pay every single person in that audience, you know, whatever, you know, £1,000, €1,000 to vote for me. Then that would be, you know, in that sense under your control. They wouldn't or would be under your influence, they might still take the money and not vote for you.
Yeah.
And you can't, so unless you can't stand over them and make, with their finger on the button, but you can, but you can influence things in your direction. And that's what we do all the time.
Yes. No, I think that most NLP trainers just interpret this line way too narrow.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, we don't live in isolation. We don't.
Exactly.
Some people do, and we've spent 2 years practicing that and having a go at it. And what we discovered was we didn't like it very much. And what we like is to be out there influencing each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
In various ways, making each other feel good for no good reason, or arguing philosophy with them, or talking on.
That's the same. That's the same as feeling good.
Yeah, that's right. So we want it to be under their control, but you're quite right. That needs to be interpreted in a broader way than is normally interpreted, and it needs to be reality based. Now. This is testable and experienced, and we usually say that's based on the 5 modalities, on the senses. So we usually say, what would it be like to, what would you be hearing, what would you be seeing, what would you be feeling, what would you be smelling, what would you be tasting, what would you be saying to yourself. Now, the reason why that's important is, one, that it grounds whatever it is you want in reality. But it also, the question itself enables you, the question you ask yourself or ask another, and that enables the person to start to imagine the experience of achieving what it is that they think at that moment in time is what they want. So, you're standing on the stage and, you've paid all those people to vote for you. And, you've paid your 5 million and 70 million pounds out, whatever. What do you see? You see the audience, I don't know, maybe they're cheering, maybe they're sulking, maybe they've left to spend their money. I don't know, what you're feeling, and all of those things. So we bring it into the experience. So that we can start to imagine, because imagination in terms of direction and goals is a muscle. So the more we exercise the imagination muscle, the better it feels, and the more real it becomes. So and of course, if we imagine doing something in its entirety, as thoroughly and as completely as we can, when we remember imagining it, it's very close to having had the experience, because they're the same. Apparently, they're the same on the neural cortex. There's 2 places of remembering, imagining, and remembering it, reality is very much the same. And lots of people have got experience of this, that they'll have heard stories over and over again that their parents have told about them being little, or when they were a child, something that happened, and they think they remember it, and they might, they may remember it, but they may have just imagined it, and now they remember imagining it because they've been told the story so many times. It feels real, and that's what we're after. We're after that feeling of reality. Because then it feels like we've already done it, and it's easy, as we said the other week when we were doing timelines. Once we've already done it, it feels easier, because it's like doing it the second time.
Yes, I think it also has to do with the fact that NLP was very much influenced by a book called Plants and the Structure of Behavior from 1960. Where that's the original source for the Toti model. But it also says that if you think about it, because the whole thinking in terms of goals is cybernetic, is a part of cybernetics, that book is applying cybernetics to humans. And that's the first book that did that. And of course, NLP is a cybernetic model. They're using that book actually. And there they say that the goal is basically a mental image of how you want the world to be, and it has to be different from how the world is, because if your goal is exactly like it is today, then that's not a goal. That's just describing how the world is. So the moment you create a goal, you actually imagine the world to be different than it's today. And then you have, of course, strategies. So how do I get from the world as it is today to the world that I wanted it to be in my imagination? So I think that, from the get-go, imagining your goals is already very important, or imagining how the world or your life would be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's really interesting, Jos. You should put those links up, really. And I rely on
they're all in the Structure of Magic book. The Structure of Magic book actually has a bibliography in the end, and there are many interesting books that explain a lot of where they got the all the information from the first version of NLP. And many people don't actually look up those books, but I did. And many books are, I say, are well known, but are not that influential. But there are a couple, like the Plans and Structure of Behavior, that have been very influential on NLP and have gotten very little attention.
Well, we'll plug them on. I shall have to go back and in my dotage reread some of those. Well, read the links. I rely on you to do a lot of that work for me, Joost. Yeah. Like I just sit and listen to you, see, and you can explain it to me. I go, oh, that was easy. Give me a précis of it. That's fine. Yeah, so imagining your experience gets you closer to that thing. So then the last one, we come to this word again. Oh dear, here we go again. Ecological, and ecological has a particular meaning in NLP, which doesn't mean we're all very green and saving the planet. It ecological means ecological in terms of your own values. Does it fit with what you believe, what you want, what your family, what you've been brought up to believe? Is it in line with everything else? Because if it's not in line with everything else, the chances are you're probably not going to do it. Because it will grate against all those other things. So
yes. But would you also check with the ecological stuff is indeed not the environment, although it could be part of it. It is again one of those terms from the 60s and 70s. It basically means all the people you have to deal with in your environment, and you're explaining as I always do the same, in the sense that if it's your goal or your direction, then you are also the most important person to have to be able to agree with it, to understand that this is good for you. And if you work with a coachee or a trainee, then of course the perspective switches to the coachee and the trainee, and whatever changes you're going to apply or goal setting or direction setting needs to be good for him or her. But it will also be good for their partner or their children. And so you actually expand the ecological system by adding more and more people. So you go, okay, for the family, the wider family, and maybe your neighbors and your co-workers. But then you run into the problem that, of course, at one point you could have changes or outcomes or goals or directions that are good for the person and his partner, his or her partner, the children, the family, but not so good for the co-workers. So
I think that's really interesting. And also there are limits to this. Because if everything has to be sort of, I mean, it's almost, if you like, it's almost a patriarchy or a matriarchy of a family structure if you take it to its extreme, because you're basically saying unless everybody around you agrees with it, it's not going to happen for you. Well, that's not necessarily the case.
No. Of course, if you keep on expanding it, at one point you get the whole planet. Well, that is the ecological word as we understand it now. But I could just keep on expanding and say, okay, but how about the solar system? Is what you're going to do, is it good for the solar system? Or the Milky Way? Well, how is the Milky Way feeling about this? And then the whole universe. And then, of course, if you really have to check whether your goal or your direction is hurting anything anywhere in the universe, it's a kind of big assignment that might be too big to actually find an answer to.
Yeah, and I don't always think that that's sometimes there's a bit of a I'm going to do that anyway, which is quite a good motivator, a feeling of like, well, sod you, I'm going to do this, whatever. So I mean, I think about, like, I remember I was when I went to do my degree, when I went to university, I didn't go at 18 and have a ball like most people did. I went at 21. I had wait a minute. Oh, Jane's saying something.
The picture right now reminds me of a courtroom. Kate, you like the judge, and Joost, the clerk of the court, who records all, etc. Well, I agree with you that Kate looks like the judge, but I fear that my role is more devil's advocate than that of the clerk.
Yeah, that's true. Jane's imagination sometimes is just astonishing. I love it. I forgot what I was going to say now. It's got those complete patterned. Oh yes, I remember. So I went to do a degree, and I had a young family. I was married. I was having to sort of work part-time, and it wasn't easy. I quite often don't choose the easy routes. It's part of my life is to find hard ways to do things for whatever reason. But my mum, of course, you don't always get consistency of values within the family either. So my mum's attitude was, it doesn't really matter what you do, because, you're just going to be a wife and mother mainly. So she wasn't unsupportive. She provided childcare, which was quite important to me and things like this. But it was all a bit like, well, she's just doing the thing. She's selfishly going off and doing whatever she wants to do.
Right.
My dad.
I had a girlfriend at one point in my first big long-term relationship, and she moved from lower education to higher and higher, and even ended up at the university. Mainly also to get her glued to me, which I didn't like. I thought that I was finally getting rid of her by moving to the university, but she just followed along. But her parents, they hated it. They said, well, we provided you, we paid for your lower education, you should be happy with it, and you should not move on. And in fact, of course, in the Netherlands, all education is free. So I was going, I didn't pay anything. She was completely hypnotized, but my parents paid for it. They were really angry at her for getting more education than they chose for her.
Yeah. Well, in my family, my mum had one view, my dad had another. My dad was, well, any fool can get a degree. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm not that bright. Maybe I can't. I don't know. What if I try this and I fail? That makes me like worse than any fool. And my ex-husband, he just always took the easy way. So I remember once tearing my hair out with some complicated piece of legislation that I couldn't get in my head. I even remember it was the 1928 Property Act. It was Section 40. That one, that was so important in my life, and I couldn't get my head around it. I was really frustrated one night trying to write this essay, and I didn't understand. And he was going, oh, well, give up, love. Give up if don't make yourself unhappy. If at first you don't succeed, give up. And so for me, there was a part of me that went, well, I'm going to do this despite what everybody else thinks.
Right.
And then you seek out people who do share those values. So I used to go on the train into Manchester in the morning, and there was in this carriage, there were 4 or 5 other young women who were all doing degrees at university, some of them mature or whatever. And we used to sort of huddle together and support each other because we shared those values. Right. So sometimes even, you can seek out the values that will support you, even if they're not immediately around you. So that whole idea that everybody's got to agree and support you is not necessarily the case, but it has to really conform in some way to your core values. Right. And those around you mustn't hinder you to the point where it becomes extremist. So if we go back to our X factor analogy, if bribing, if bribery is really contrary to your core values, right, then setting that up to spend your inheritance bribing so you win that isn't going to happen, because it will set up too much dissonance in the person to be able to do that. So it has to, for me, the ecology check, the values thing has to start with you. And, then you seek those people who support you. If it happens to go out into the Milky Way and the Milky Way will support you, then great. But it isn't always about having the whole world around you, because actually, right, if everybody agrees with you, if everybody agrees all the time, all we get is a sort of stagnation.
Yes.
Because nothing changes then.
You agree with me that ecological check doesn't mean that everyone should be happy with it.
No, and me too. I agree. It has to be primarily your values. And quite often, this is a big mistake. I'm going to talk here because I know Jane's always interested in her boys. So, one of the big mistakes we make as parents is to constantly try and persuade our children to share the values that we have at that moment in time. Now, actually, the chances are, as time goes on, by the time they get to 14, 50, they will have very similar values to you.
Right.
But when they're 14 and 15, they are experimenting with a whole load of other values and other priorities that are not yours. So this is often where the conflict and tension with teenagers comes. So, you know, if you're saying to your teenager, well, if you stay in on Friday and Saturday night and work extra hard, then you'll get the grades, and then you'll get, you know, pass your exams, and then you'll be able to go to university and get a degree, and then you can have a life like me. And they go like, why would I want that? You know, and also, right, you know, their priority goals at that time is to have friends, be part of the pack, be out with their mates, wearing the same clothes, listening to the same music, doing that thing, bonding with it. And so, you know, asking them to do something which is so contrary to where their drive is at the time will mean that you haven't got an outcome that they, or a direction that they can buy into. So you have to find a way of finding their values and finding a way of getting them to do what it is that's good for them in the long run, which, you know, most parents have the best interest of their kids at heart, good for them in the long run, while still satisfying their immediate needs, those things that they feel are really important to them at this moment in time because they're teenagers or kids or whatever.
Right. So here's my question to you. When you talk like this, it sounds like you really believe in the existence of values, yet a value is a nominalization. If we put it in the wheelbarrow, there's nothing there.
Yeah, that's right.
So can you, how to say something about how you see values?
I just think values are big beliefs. I think that they're just things we believe in, and
Right.
And when
the beliefs are also nominalization, so that's not
yeah. So they're just things that we make up.
Okay, so this, you use them as hypnotic constructs to hypnotize people into believing that they should check the values. Because to me, values is people only have value. A certain value is to behave in a certain way. Because you can ask, how do you know that person X has value Y? And then the only answer can be because he or she acts in a certain way. So I think that it's actually more about desired and undesired behaviors.
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't argue with that either. Yours, I don't. You know, I'm not going to argue the toss. You know what I'm like. I'm like, could be, might be that, could be this.
So I'm
a pragmatist. Remember, I'm the pragmatist. I look at what works. Does that work? So if in this constance we're using a term called values because it works for us in that thing, then we'll use that term values. I don't need it to be true.
No, I agree with you, and the truth doesn't exist. There's also a normalization, so we can be completely pragmatic about it. But there's a difference between hypnotic pragmatism, which is basically means it is a really good word to hypnotize other people, and clarifying pragmatism, where you say, okay, then you really understand well how things hang together in reality. And I agree with you on the hypnotic pragmatism, but I just don't agree with the clarifying pragmatism. And I think that these desired and undesired behavior, but it's no problem. We can just see if ecological confirms to your desired behaviors. So you want to promote with your direction and your goals desired behaviors according to your taste. And you want to make sure that you are not promoting undesired behaviors.
Yeah. Yes, that's fine. So there we are. We have 1 minute to go. So that's my take on directions rather than goals.
Yes. Can I borrow you for another 10 minutes?
Well, yes. Well, we've had that up all that time. So yes, take it down. You can borrow me for 5 more minutes. I have somebody coming soon. Why? What did you want?
Because I want to show you Marco.
Oh, okay.
I have no clue how to do this.
No, you don't, do you?
I'm just trying to really quickly introduce you to Marco.
Well, you could have done another slide. Just create another slide.
This isn't another slide. Oh, measurable active reliable, control. Well, there's control again. You're going to see observable.
Okay.
So here with Marco. This is from the applied behavioral analysis, the stuff that I added to NLP. Because I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to do it extremely quick. So measurable is basically the same what you had in your slide. How it's called in your slide? Reality-based, testable in experience. And so if we can measure it, that's all that. Active means that you actually have to do something. Basically it says that if your goal, I'm going to talk about goals and direction, but this is not about goals and direction. That is the kicker that I'm ending with. So if a dead person can do it, then it's not a goal or a direction. Reliable means basically that it can be measured reliable. So you actually have multiple persons come up with very similar measurements. Control is basically the same as you explained it just before. And observable is, of course, also reality-based. Sometimes stuff is not measurable, but it's observable, and sometimes it's not observable, but it is measurable. And we need to have those both. And the interesting part is that this sounds really a lot like your previous slide, right?
However,
this is about behavior rather than goals and directions. So this is the definition of external behavior according to applied behavioral analysis. Something is external behavior if it can be measured, if you have to do it yourself, and if a dead person can do it, it's not behavior. You have to be reliable in testing results, and you have to be under control, and it has to be observable. Otherwise, it's not external behavior. And this came because I find it so much the same as this one. I came to the conclusion that our direction and our goals are actually behaviors. Those are desired behaviors, and we want to see how we behave differently in the future. And how do you feel about that idea?
I think you're right, really. I mean, all of it at the end of the day is about, we can't observe the inside of somebody's head.
Exactly.
We can't observe what people's motivation is, or their values, or their beliefs. All we have to observe is their behavior. So from that point of view, if you want to be as scientific as you can be, in our pseudoscience NLP, then
no, it's not a pseudoscience, it's a protoscience.
Protoscience, all right. Protoscience.
In the same way that astrology was a protoscience to astronomy, that alchemy was a protoscience to chemistry, and psychology is a protoscience to a real scientific psychology, because the current level of psychology is I think lacking or behind NLP. NLP is closer to being a scientific, real scientific form of psychology than psychology itself. Yes, and I think as long as we see psychology as well as a proto-science, then we can see NLP rather as a proto-science than as a pseudoscience.
Okay, wrong word. So yes, I would agree with you that if you're looking to set an outcome or a direction, then what you're actually looking at is behavioral change.
Yes.
And that behavior can be physically on the outside, or it could be behavior of things that you do on the inside of your life as well.
Feeling, imagination, inner self-talk.
And that's why I like to think of imagination as a muscle, as opposed to something that doesn't sort of really, is a bit nebulous and doesn't exist. It's a process that we can utilize for loads of different things.
Yes, but I also think that it's quite important that you see that if you set goals or set yourself a direction, that you actually see how you want to act in the future.
Yes, yes.
And that you also see how you acted to get there.
Yes, and that you can actually go to the end in terms of tying it back to that timeline work, that we can go to the end, imagine it.
Exactly.
As a marker or in pure, and then look back to see what you've done in your imagination that gets you there, because that also gives you directional steps.
Exactly.
To take.
Good. 5 minutes are up.
I think we're agreeing.
Good, good.
We've had no questions from anybody today. Have we just?
No, everybody's running off. They're all. We're so good at ending at 2 o'clock that everybody was going. That's 2 o'clock. I have to go.
You know me. I'm on the dot. So
yes.
So they've missed the bonus 5 minutes, but they can watch and catch up later.
We'll make a special video out of it. So thank you, Kate. We're going to see each other next week again with a new subject. Thank you very much for this very enlightening way to set the directions rather than goals. And well, everybody else who watched or is listening later, thank you for participating. Thank you for rewatching it. Come and join us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central European Standard Time, and it's equivalent in Greenwich Mean Time. I have no clue. There's some. Is it still 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock at your?
It's 12 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock. We're still on. It's British summertime. It's 12 o'clock. I think we're British summertime. We're not in Greenwich Mean Time. We're in British summertime now. It's 12 o'clock.
Right.
Our clocks have moved. So yes, 12 o'clock in the UK, and probably somewhere else in the world, and 1 o'clock in the rest of Europe or most of Europe.
Yes, will do. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye now. Thank you. Bye.